The day the sky burned. The sky above Seoul turned black at exactly 3:47 in the afternoon. Not from clouds, not from smoke, but from ships. Thousands upon thousands of alien warships blocked out the sun, stretching from horizon to horizon like a metal blanket covering the earth. Admiral Wu stood on the bridge of the undying Seoul, Earth's largest battleship. His hands were steady, but his heart was not. He had spent 30 years preparing for war. He had studied every battle in human history, but nothing had prepared him for this. The hegemony had arrived. Every child in the galaxy knew about the hegemony. They were the conquerors, the slavers. They had crushed 400 species across 1,000 star systems. No one had ever beaten them. No one had ever even come close. When they arrived at your planet, you had two choices: surrender and become slaves, or fight and become extinct. The first message came through on every frequency, every television, every phone, every radio. A cold, mechanical voice spoke in perfect English, perfect Korean, perfect every language on Earth at the same time. Species of Earth, you are now property of the galactic hegemony. You have one planetary rotation to surrender all military forces. Compliance will result in survival. Resistance will result in extinction. This is your only warning. Wu looked at his crew, young men and women who had joined the fleet believing they would explore the stars. Now they faced the end of their species. He saw fear in their eyes, but he also saw something else, something that made him proud to be human. He saw anger. Wu opened a channel, not just to his fleet, to every human on Earth. He wanted everyone to hear what he was about to say. This is Admiral Wu of the United Earth Defense Force. I have heard the enemy's message. Now hear mine. He paused. His voice was calm and clear. We do not kneel, ever. The bridge erupted in cheers. Across the planet, people watching the broadcast felt something stir in their chests. Hope, defiance, the refusal to accept that this was the end. The hegemony did not wait for the deadline. 2 hours after their warning, the attack began. Beams of light fell from the sky like rain. Seoul burned. New York burned. Lagos burned. Beijing, Mumbai, London. One by one, the great cities of Earth turned to ash and fire. In the first 72 hours, 3 billion humans died. Wu's fleet fought back. They threw everything they had at the enemy: missiles, nuclear warheads. For every hegemony ship they destroyed, they lost 20 of their own. The math was simple and terrible. Earth was losing. But they kept fighting. In the burning ruins of a sergeant named pulled survivors from collapsed buildings. He was bleeding from a wound on his head. His uniform was torn. His squad was dead, all of them. Boys and girls he had trained with for years, gone in seconds. A young woman grabbed his arm. "What do we do?" she asked. Her face was covered in dust and tears. "Where do we go?" Looked at the sky. Enemy ships floated overhead like metal gods. Ground troops were landing everywhere. Strange, tall creatures in black armor, carrying weapons that turned humans to ash with a single shot. He should have told her to run, to hide, to surrender. That was the logical thing to do. Instead, he picked up a rifle from a dead soldier's hands. "We fight," he said. "We find others. We make them pay for every street, every building, every inch of our home." The woman stared at him, then she nodded. She picked up another rifle. By nightfall had gathered 47 survivors. By the end of the week he had 300. They hid in the subway tunnels. They attacked enemy patrols in the darkness. They could not win. They knew that, but they could make the enemy remember their names. In the sky above the Pacific Ocean, Captain flew her fighter through a storm of enemy fire. Her squadron had been 12 pilots. Now she was alone. Her friends had died around her, one by one, their ships exploding into balls of flame. Her own ship was damaged. Alarms screamed in her ears. Her engine was failing. Her weapons were nearly empty. She had maybe 5 minutes before her fighter fell from the sky. A massive hegemony carrier loomed ahead. It was the command ship for the entire Pacific assault. Inside it were thousands of enemy soldiers, generals, leaders, the beings who had ordered the deaths of billions. Made a choice. She pushed her failing engine to maximum. Her ship screamed toward the carrier. The enemy fired at her, but she was too fast, too small, moving with the desperate skill of someone who had nothing left to lose. At the last moment, she aimed for the engine core, the weakest point, the one spot where her tiny fighter could do real damage. She ejected 3 seconds before impact. The explosion was beautiful, a flower of fire blooming in the dark sky. The carrier broke apart, its pieces falling toward the ocean below. It crashed into the enemy's ground command center, destroying it completely. Floated down on her parachute watching the fire, she was alone, injured, lost somewhere over the burning Pacific, but she was smiling. The enemy had expected humanity to break. They had conquered 400 species. Every single one had surrendered after the first major attack. It was logical. It was sensible. When you were outmatched so completely, fighting was just slow suicide. But humans were not logical. In the ruins of Shanghai, civilians built bombs from kitchen supplies. In the mountains of Switzerland, old soldiers came out of retirement. In the deserts of Africa, tribes that had never seen a computer picked up fallen alien weapons and learned to use them. The hegemony's war council watched from orbit. They had conquered worlds, enslaved billions. They had seen every kind of resistance, brave last stands, desperate attacks, final charges. But they had never seen this. They should have surrendered by now, one council member said. Every projection shows total defeat within 30 cycles. They must know this. They know, another replied. They do not care. That is not logical. No, it is not. On the surface below, in the ashes of what used to be civilization, humans were not surrendering. They were building weapons, shelters, communication networks, resistance cells. They had lost their cities. They had lost billions of their people. They had lost any reasonable hope of victory. But they had not lost themselves. In a hidden bunker somewhere in the Korean mountains, Admiral Wu gathered what remained of Earth's military leadership. His fleet was shattered. His armies were broken. He had nothing left but words. He spoke them anyway. They came here expecting us to fall. They came here expecting us to beg for mercy. They came here expecting another easy conquest. He looked at the tired faces around him. Soldiers, scientists, leaders, all of them wounded, all of them grieving, all of them still fighting. They were wrong. We are not like the others. We are humans. We survived ice ages. We survived plagues. We survived ourselves. We will survive this. How, someone asked, how can we possibly win? Wu smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had accepted something terrible and found peace in it. We do not have to win. We just have to never stop fighting. We have to make this war so painful, so costly, so endless that they will learn a simple truth. He stood. Some species are not worth conquering. Some species are too stubborn to break. Some species would rather burn than kneel. Outside the bunker, the sky still glowed orange from the burning cities. Enemy ships still patrolled overhead. The future was dark and uncertain. But humanity was still standing. And they had no intention of stopping. The doctrine of spite. 8 months had passed since the sky burned. The hegemony controlled the surface of Earth. Their flags flew over every major city. Their soldiers patrolled every street. Their ships blocked out the stars. They believed they had won. They were wrong. Commander floated in the darkness of space, looking at Earth through the window of her small ship. The planet looked peaceful from here, blue and green and white. You could not see the fires from this distance. You could not see the camps where humans were sorted for slavery. You could not see the mass graves. But knew they were there. She had lost her family in the first week. Her parents, her brother, her daughter only 6 years old, all gone, all ash. She should have felt broken. Instead, she felt something else, something cold and hard and sharp. Spite commanded what remained of Earth's space forces, 12 ships, 12 tiny ships against thousands of enemy warships. The math was impossible. Victory was impossible. So she stopped trying to win. She started trying to hurt. Her fleet hid in the asteroid belt using the rocks for cover. They struck at enemy supply lines, quick attacks in the darkness, hit and run. They destroyed food shipments. They crippled transport vessels. They killed enemy soldiers whenever they could. It was not enough to change the war, but it was enough to make the enemy angry, to make them waste resources hunting shadows, to make them understand that humanity was not finished. On Earth had built something remarkable. What started as 47 survivors in a subway tunnel had grown into a network spanning 3 continents. They called themselves the Ghost Army. They had no uniforms, no bases, no flags. They were everywhere and nowhere. Every enemy patrol that entered a human neighborhood lost soldiers, bombs hidden in rubble, snipers on rooftops, poison in water supplies. The hegemony could not sleep without fearing human knives in the dark. The enemy responded with cruelty. They rounded up civilians and executed them in public squares. They burned entire districts. They tortured prisoners and broadcast their screams. It did not work. For every human they killed, 10 more joined the resistance. Farmers who had never held a gun learned to fight. Children carried messages through tunnels the enemy did not know existed. Old women mixed chemicals to make explosives. The hegemony could not understand it. Every other species had broken under such treatment. Fear was supposed to work. Pain was supposed to work. Death was supposed to work. But humans were different. In a hidden laboratory beneath the ruins of Seoul, Doctor worked day and night. Before the war, she had studied alien life forms, bacteria, plants, simple organisms from distant worlds. Now she studied the enemy. Captured hegemony soldiers lay on her tables. She examined their bodies, their blood, their brains. She was looking for weakness, any weakness. She found one. The hegemony soldiers were connected, not by radio, not by computer, by biology. Their brains were linked to their commanders through a strange organic network. When they received orders, they followed them without question. It made them perfect soldiers, obedient, coordinated, unstoppable. But it was also a flaw. If the connection was broken, the soldiers became confused, lost. They could not think for themselves. They had never needed to. Smiled in the darkness of her laboratory. She had found a weapon. She just needed time to build it. Above the clouds, Captain flew again. She had survived her impossible attack. Fishermen had pulled her from the ocean, half dead and delirious. The resistance had found her, healed her, given her a new ship. Not a human ship, a stolen hegemony fighter. Learning to fly, it had been hard. The controls were designed for alien hands. The symbols were in a language no human could read, but was stubborn. She studied. She practiced. She crashed twice and almost died. On the 3rd attempt, she flew. Now she trained others, young pilots who had survived the first battles. They flew captured enemy ships, learning their secrets. They could not match the hegemony in numbers, but they could match them in skill. The Supreme Overseer grew frustrated. The conquest of Earth should have been finished months ago. His soldiers should have been sorting slaves by now. Instead, they were dying every day. His supply lines were bleeding. His reports were full of failure. He decided to send a message. The city was still mostly intact. 3 million humans lived there under occupation. They had not caused much trouble. They had seemed broken, obedient. The Overseer chose them as an example. The orbital bombardment lasted 6 minutes. When it was over, was glass. 3 million lives erased in less time than it takes to eat a meal. The overseer broadcast the destruction to every human on the planet. "This is the cost of resistance," the cold voice announced. "Surrender now or more will follow." The next morning stood in the ashes of. The ground was still warm. The air smelled like burned plastic and something worse, something human. A camera drone floated nearby, broadcasting to resistance cells around the world. Knew the enemy was watching too. He did not care. "They think they can burn us into submission," he said. His voice was rough, tired, but steady. "They do not understand. We are a species that crawled out of caves. We survived ice ages. We survived plagues. We survived our own weapons of mass destruction. We did not conquer this planet by being reasonable." He paused. He picked up a handful of ash and let it fall through his fingers. "Every human you kill creates 10 more who will never stop fighting. You cannot exterminate spite. You cannot bomb hatred out of existence. You have made a terrible mistake coming here, and you will pay for it with blood." The broadcast spread, not just on Earth. Somehow it reached Fleet. From there it was transmitted outward, into space, into the void. Anyone listening could hear it. Anyone, including the other conquered species. In the slave camps of 100 worlds, beings who had forgotten hope heard a strange message. A species called humans was fighting back. Not just fighting, refusing to break, refusing to surrender, even when cities burned, even when millions died. It was impossible, it was foolish, it was inspiring. Fleet grew, not by much. They captured an enemy cruiser in a desperate boarding action. 30 humans died to take it, but now they had their first faster-than-light ship. They could go anywhere. The War Council of the Hegemony received reports that made no sense. They had lost more soldiers on Earth in 8 months than in their last 50 planetary conquests combined. The humans were not winning, but they were not losing either. They were just continuing, like a wound that would not heal. "What are they fighting for?" a council member asked. "They cannot win, they must know this." "They are fighting because they refuse to stop," another answered. "It is not about victory, it is about defiance." "That is insane." "Yes, that is what makes them dangerous." On Earth flew her stolen ship through enemy formations, planted bombs in enemy bases, worked on her weapon, planned her next attack. They were tired, they were wounded, they were dying by the thousands every day. But they were not broken. The Supreme Overseer looked at his maps and saw a problem that should not exist. His armies controlled the planet. His ships controlled the sky. By every measurement, he had won. But humans did not believe in measurements. They believed in spite, in anger, in the simple refusal to accept reality. The Overseer had conquered 400 species. He had never faced anything like this. He was beginning to understand that he might never fully control these strange, stubborn creatures. He could kill them. He could burn their cities. He could enslave their bodies. But he could not break their spirits. And that terrified him. The fire spreads. 2 years into the war, something unexpected happened. The fire that burned on Earth began to spread to other worlds. It started on a mining colony 40 light-years away. The planet had no name, only a number. The hegemony did not give names to slave worlds. They gave numbers and quotas and punishments for failure. 10 million beings worked in those mines. They had been slaves for 300 years. Their grandparents had been slaves. Their grandparents' grandparents had been slaves. They had forgotten what freedom felt like. Then they heard about the humans. Stories spread through whispers, through stolen transmissions, through the dreams of the desperate. A species called humans was fighting the hegemony, not just fighting, surviving, making the conquerors bleed. One morning, the slaves in Mine 47 did not report for work. The hegemony sent soldiers to force them. The soldiers never came back. It was a small rebellion. It was crushed within a week. But it was the first rebellion in 300 years, and it was not the last. Admiral Wu had recovered from his wounds. He now commanded humanity's growing fleet from the captured battleship Defiance. The ship was old. It had been taken in battle, repaired with stolen parts, and held together with human stubbornness. It was also the most feared ship in the galaxy. Wu understood something the hegemony did not. This war was not about planets. It was not about ships. It was about belief. The hegemony's power came from the belief that they could not be defeated. Once that belief broke, everything else would follow. He made a decision that would change history. Standing on the bridge of the Defiance, he broadcast a message, not to Earth, not to the hegemony, to the slaves. We are humanity. We were supposed to fall. We did not. For 2 years we have fought against an enemy that has never lost. We have bled. We have burned. We have buried our children and our parents and our friends, but we are still standing. His voice carried across the stars, reaching worlds that had forgotten the word freedom. If you are listening, know this. Chains are only as strong as your belief in them. The hegemony is not invincible. They bleed. They die. They fear. Rise up and we will fight beside you. Rise up and we will show the universe that tyranny always falls. The message spread like fire through dry grass. In slave camps across 100 worlds, beings who had accepted their fate began to question it. If the humans could fight, why could they not? On Earth, the resistance achieved something incredible. Had planned the attack for 6 months. Every detail was perfect. Every cell was coordinated. Every sacrifice was counted. The target was the hegemony's continental command center. It sat in the ruins of Shanghai, protected by walls of steel and armies of soldiers. Breaking it would prove that humans could do more than hide. They could attack. Captain flew the first wave. Her pilots had trained for this moment. 30 stolen fighters flying in formation, striking at the air defenses around the compound. They could not destroy them all, but they could create a gap. Through that gap came and his ground forces. The battle lasted 3 days. 3 days of fire and blood and screaming. Humans died by the hundreds, but they pushed forward, room by room, floor by floor, body by body. When the smoke cleared, the hegemony flag lay in the dirt. A young soldier named picked it up. She was bleeding from wounds on her arms and face. She had killed 11 enemy soldiers with her bare hands when her rifle ran out of ammunition. She tore the flag in half, then she burned it. The broadcast of the burning flag reached every human on Earth. It reached the fleet in space. It reached the slave worlds. It reached the Hegemony War Council. For the first time in their history, the council members felt fear. 3 more species rose in rebellion, then 5, then 12. The galaxy was waking up. Commander led a daring mission to capture a hegemony communications hub. The hub controlled all transmissions in an entire sector. With it, humanity could hear everything the enemy said. The attack was costly, lost half her crew, good people, friends, soldiers who had followed her into the impossible. But they took the hub. Now humanity knew where every enemy ship was, where every supply line ran, where every weak point hid. Doctor had finished her weapon. 2 years of work in the darkness. 2 years of studying enemy bodies and enemy brains. She understood the connection now. The biological network that linked hegemony soldiers to their commanders. She could break it. The weapon was a virus, not a disease that killed bodies, a signal that killed connections. It would spread through the enemy network, cutting soldiers off from their commanders. Without orders, the soldiers would be helpless. Their greatest strength would become their greatest weakness. But delivering the virus was another problem. It needed to reach the heart of the hegemony network, the Supreme Overseer's flagship, the most heavily protected ship in the galaxy. That was a problem for another day. For now, humanity celebrated. In the liberated zone around Shanghai, something beautiful happened. A child was born. Her parents were in Minyu, both resistance fighters, both survivors of impossible battles. They named their daughter Hope. It was a simple name, a human name. It meant everything. Minu held his daughter in his arms and cried, not from sadness, from joy, from the belief that maybe, just maybe, there would be a future worth living. She will never know chains, he whispered too. She will never kneel, she will grow up free. Put her hand on his. She was tired, wounded, in ways that would never heal, but she was smiling. That is what we are fighting for, she said. Not revenge, not victory, but this, a chance for something better. The Hegemony Supreme Council met for the first time in 200 years. They had not needed to meet before. Everything had been simple. Conquer, enslave, expand. The formula had worked for 1,000 years. Now the formula was broken. How do we defeat them? The council asked. How do we break a species that treats death as an acceptable cost? No one had an answer. They are inspiring others, a council member said. The slave worlds are restless. We have had 12 rebellions in the last cycle. 12. We have not had 12 rebellions in the last century. Then we must crush them completely, destroy Earth, end the human species. We have been trying. They will not die. The council fell silent. They were the masters of the galaxy. They had conquered everything. They had never failed. Until now. On Earth, Admiral Wu stood on a hill overlooking the liberated zone. Ships flew overhead, carrying supplies and soldiers. Humans walked the streets without fear. Children played in the ruins of buildings. It was not much, a few hundred square miles of freedom in a world of slavery, but it was a start. His voice came through his communicator. Admiral, the rebel fleets are gathering. 6 species have sent ships. More are coming. Wu smiled. It was a tired smile, a smile that had seen too much death, but it was real. Good, he said. Tell them we are ready. Tell them the fire is just beginning. The war was far from over. The hegemony was still strong. Humanity was still outnumbered. But the universe was changing. Slaves were becoming soldiers. Fear was becoming hope. The impossible was becoming possible. And it had all started with 5 simple words. We do not kneel, ever. The breaking point. Year 3, the hegemony committed everything. Every warship, every soldier, every weapon they had built over 1,000 years of conquest. They gathered the largest fleet the galaxy had ever seen. 10,000 warships, each one capable of destroying a moon. Their target was Earth. Their goal was extinction. Admiral Wu received the reports with a calm face. His officers watched him, waiting for fear, waiting for despair. They saw neither. How many ships do we have? He asked. 847, replied. She was his second in command now. The cold, sharp woman who had turned spite into a weapon, plus 300 from our allies, the rebels from 6 liberated worlds. Wu nodded. 1,100 ships against 10,000. The math was simple. The math was death. But humans had never been good at math. We will meet them at the edge of the solar system, he said. We will not let them reach Earth. Admiral, we cannot win this battle. Wu looked at her. His eyes were tired but steady. No, but we can make them pay for every inch. We can bleed them so badly that even victory tastes like defeat, and if we fall standing. The fleet gathered. 847 human ships, warships built from scraps and stolen parts, fighters piloted by men and women who had lost everything, cruisers crewed by the last survivors of a dying species. 300 allied ships joined them, beings from 6 different worlds, species that had been slaves for centuries. They had no military training, they had no war experience, but they had something more important. They had hope, and they had learned it from humans. Captain led the fighter squadrons. She had become a legend. The woman who had crashed her ship into a carrier. The woman who had survived the impossible. Her pilots her. She gathered them before the battle. Young faces, scared faces, brave faces. "I'm not going to lie to you," she said. "Most of us will die today. The enemy is stronger, bigger, more numerous, but that does not matter. What matters is that we fight. What matters is that the universe sees humans do not surrender. What matters is that 1,000 years from now, someone will tell the story of this day and say, they were outnumbered 10-1 and they attacked anyway." Her pilots cheered. It was the sound of the doomed embracing their fate. The battle began at dawn. 10,000 hegemony ships emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system. They formed a wall of metal and fire, stretching across space like a wave of death. Against them stood 1,100 defenders, less than one ship for every 10 enemies. Admiral Wu gave the order, "All ships attack." The human fleet charged. It was not a defensive battle. It was not a careful tactical withdrawal. It was a screaming, burning, desperate assault directly into the heart of the enemy formation. The hegemony had expected humanity to retreat, to hide, to make them fight for every planet, every moon, every asteroid. That was the logical strategy. Instead, the humans came straight at them. The first hour was slaughter. Human ships exploded by the dozens. Allied ships burned. The void filled with wreckage and bodies and fire. But the hegemony was dying too. For every human ship destroyed, they lost 3, 4, 5. The humans fought like demons, like monsters, like beings who had already accepted death and decided to take as many enemies with them as possible. Led her squadron into the heart of the enemy formation. Her mission was impossible. Reach the Supreme Overseer's flagship, deliver Doctor's virus, cut the enemy's brain from its body. She lost pilots every minute, faces she knew, names she would never forget. They died to clear a path for her. They died smiling. For Earth, they said as they crashed their ships into enemy guns. For humanity, for spite. Ship was hit, then hit again. Alarms screamed. Fire burned in her cockpit. Her weapons were gone. Her engines were failing. But she was close, so close. The flagship loomed ahead, massive, terrifying, the brain of the entire hegemony military. Transmitted the virus. She felt it leave her ship, felt it enter the enemy network. She had done it. The mission was complete. Then the missiles hit. Her last transmission was broadcast to every human ship, to every Allied vessel, to Earth itself. "Tell them we never surrendered. Tell them we never will." Her ship exploded. Captain, the woman who would not die, finally died, but she died victorious. The virus spread. It moved through the hegemony network like poison through blood. One by one, the connections broke. Soldiers who had never thought for themselves suddenly had no thoughts at all. Ships that had moved in perfect formation began to drift. Commanders who had always known exactly what to do suddenly knew nothing. The hegemony fleet fell into chaos. Ships crashed into each other. Guns fired at allies. Formations collapsed. The perfect military machine became a confused, dying animal. Admiral Wu saw his chance. All ships pressed the attack. The human fleet surged forward, battered, bleeding, down to less than 300 ships, but attacking. The battle lasted 11 hours. When it was over, the hegemony fleet was broken. 4,000 enemy ships destroyed, 3,000 captured, the rest fled into the void. Humanity had won. But the cost was terrible. 70% of the fleet was gone, thousands of humans dead. Heroes and friends and lovers all turned to ash and memory. On Earth led the final assault. The hegemony's last stronghold was in the Gobi Desert, a massive fortress built to withstand orbital bombardment. Inside were the last enemy soldiers on Earth. Without connection to their commanders, they were confused and weak, but they were still dangerous. Forces attacked at sunrise. Tanks and soldiers and guerrilla fighters who had spent 3 years learning to kill. The battle was brutal. Room by room, tunnel by tunnel, fought with a rifle in one hand and a knife in the other. He was not young anymore. His body was covered in scars, but he refused to stop. Minyu fought beside him. Husband, Hope's father. He carried a picture of his daughter in his pocket close to his heart. They reached the central command. The last enemy soldiers waited there, cornered, desperate, still deadly. The fight was short and terrible. When it was over, 10 humans were dead. Minyu was one of them. Held his friend as he died. There were no words. There was nothing to say. Minyu just smiled and whispered one word. Hope. Then he was gone. Climbed to the top of the fortress. His hands shook. His eyes burned. He carried the Earth flag stained with blood and dirt and tears. He planted it on the enemy commander's bunker. The flag waved in the desert wind. He wept, not from victory, from remembering everyone who did not live to see this moment. In space, Admiral Wu received word of the ground victory. He was wounded, badly wounded. A piece of shrapnel had torn through his chest during the battle. Doctors worked to save him. But he was smiling. "We did it," he whispered. "We actually did it." Took command. She looked at the shattered fleet, at the captured enemy ships, at the broken hegemony running away into the darkness. Then she received a message. The first message the Hegemony Supreme Council had ever sent to an enemy. It was not a threat. It was not a warning. It was a question. "What are your terms?" Read the message 3 times. She could not believe it. The hegemony was asking for peace. The conquerors of 400 species were admitting defeat. She did not answer immediately. She looked at Earth, blue and green and white, burning and broken, but still there, still human. Then she looked at the stars, at the galaxy that had been ruled by tyrants for 1,000 years, at the future that was suddenly, impossibly, full of possibility. She began to write her response. The war was over, but the work was just beginning. What remains? 5 years after the sky burned, the galaxy looked different. The hegemony was gone, not destroyed, dissolved, broken into pieces by rebellion and defeat and the simple loss of belief. Species that had been slaves for centuries were suddenly free. Worlds that had known only chains now governed themselves. And at the center of it all stood humanity. Admiral stood before the Council of the Galactic Alliance. 200 species had sent representatives. Some had never spoken to each other before. Some had been enemies for. Now they sat together, united by something impossible. Hope was not comfortable with speeches. She was a warrior, a fighter. She preferred action to words, but words were what they needed now. "You want to know our secret," she said. Her voice carried across the great hall. "You want to know how we survived, how we won, how a species that had barely left its own planet managed to break the greatest empire the galaxy has ever known." The representatives leaned forward, beings of all shapes and sizes, creatures with scales and feathers and skin of living metal, all watching, all waiting. "There is no secret," said. "We are small, we are fragile, we die easily. Our ships were worse than yours, our weapons were primitive, our numbers were tiny. By every measure we should have lost, we should have surrendered, we should have accepted our fate like every other species before us." She paused, her eyes swept across the room. "But we decided something different. We decided that dying free was better than living in chains. We decided that our children would never kneel. We decided that even if we lost, we would make them remember our names." She smiled. It was a tired smile, a smile that had seen too much death, but it was real. That is not strength, that is stubbornness, and stubbornness, it turns out, is contagious. The hall erupted in sound, not just applause, a roar of recognition, of agreement, of species finally understanding what had been missing from their own souls. The alliance was born. On Earth, the rebuilding had begun. The cities were still ruins. The scars of war covered every continent. Millions of graves marked the places where humans had fallen. The sky still carried smoke from fires that would burn for years. But humans were working. In what was left of Seoul, construction crews cleared rubble. In the ashes of New York, engineers designed new buildings. In the fields of Africa and Asia and Europe, farmers planted crops in soil that had been poisoned by war. It would take a century to heal, everyone knew that, but they worked anyway, because that was what humans did. Did not join the rebuilding crews. He was too old, too tired, too broken by the things he had seen and done. Instead, he opened a school. It was a small building and rebuilt, just 4 rooms and a courtyard, nothing special, but children came from across the region to learn there. He taught them about the war, not to glorify it, not to make them want to fight, but to make them understand what it had cost. Every freedom you have was paid for in blood, he told them. Your parents and grandparents did not fight because they wanted to die. They fought because they wanted you to live. Remember that. Honor that. Never waste what they gave you. The children listened. Some cried. Some asked questions. Some sat in silence thinking about parents they had never known. Answered every question. He never looked away from the hard truths. He never pretended the war was glorious. He just told the truth, and truth, he had learned, was the best teacher. Doctor became a healer. Her weapon had won the war, the virus that had broken the hegemony network. Without her, humanity would have lost. She was celebrated across the galaxy. Statues were built in her honor. Songs were written about her name. She hated all of it. I built a weapon, she told anyone who asked. I helped kill millions of beings. That is not something to celebrate, that is something to mourn. Now she worked on a different project. The hegemony species had been dependent on their biological network for thousands of years. Without it, they could barely function. They had never learned to think for themselves, to make decisions, to be free. Develop treatments to help them. Medicines that restored their ability to think independently, therapies that taught them how to make choices. It was slow work, painful work. Many of the former hegemony beings resisted. They were afraid of freedom. They did not know how to live without commands. But slowly, one by one, they learned. They became something new, something better. That was real legacy, not death but healing. Raised hope alone. Minyu was gone. His body was buried on a hill overlooking the sea. His name was carved on the memorial of the fallen, along with billions of others who had died in the war. But his spirit lived on in his daughter. Hope grew up in a world without occupation. She had never known chains, never known fear, never known the sound of alien boots on human streets. She asked about her father constantly. What was he like? What did he do? Why did he fight? Answered honestly. She showed Hope pictures, told her stories, took her to the statue in Seoul's Liberation Square, a bronze figure of a man holding a child looking toward the stars. Your father died for you, said. He died so you could be free. He died so you could grow up in a world where humans do not kneel. Hope looked at the statue. She was 5 years old. She did not fully understand death. She did not fully understand war. But she understood love. She understood sacrifice. She understood that someone had given everything so she could have everything. She touched the statue's hand. I will not waste it, she whispered. I promise. Admiral Wu survived his wounds. Barely. The doctors said it was a miracle. He said it was stubbornness. He retired from military service. His body was too broken to fight, but his mind was still sharp. His voice still carried. 1 year after the war ended, he gave his final interview. Reporters from across the galaxy came to hear him speak. The old admiral sat in a chair overlooking the ocean. His face was lined with scars. His hands trembled slightly, but his eyes were clear. What message would you send to any species that might threaten humanity again? The reporter asked. Wu smiled. It was the same smile he had worn on the bridge of the undying soul on the day the sky burned. Defiant, unbroken, human. The same message we sent the first time, he said. We do not kneel, ever. Come and find out what that means. The interview was broadcast across the galaxy. It became famous, a warning and a promise all in one. On 100 worlds, beings who had once been slaves watched the old human speak. They felt something stir in their chests, the same fire that had burned in humanity, the same refusal to accept defeat. The Galactic Alliance grew stronger every year. Former enemies became allies. Former slaves became citizens. The darkness that had ruled the galaxy slowly gave way to light. But it started with humanity. It started with stubbornness. It started with spite. On Earth, the memorial of the fallen stretched across an entire mountain range. Billions of names carved in stone. Billions of stories ended too soon. Billions of sacrifices that had made freedom possible. Every year on the anniversary of the invasion, humans gathered at the memorial. They lit candles. They spoke the names of the dead. They remembered. Hope came every year with her mother. She walked along the endless walls of names. She found her father's name and touched it gently. Then she looked up at the sky that had once burned with enemy fire, the sky that was now full of stars and ships and possibility. She smiled. On that night, watching her first sunset from liberated Earth, Hope asked her mother a question. Why is the sky so beautiful? Looked at her daughter, at the future that Minu had died for, at the world that humanity had bled to protect. Because we fought for it, she said, because nothing beautiful is ever free. Hope nodded. She did not fully understand, but she would, someday. Across the galaxy, a new proverb spread. It was whispered by the freed slaves, taught to children in schools, carved into monuments on 100 worlds. When the universe tells humans to kneel, they build a chair and sit down instead. The war was over, the hegemony was gone, the galaxy was free. And humanity stood among the stars, exactly where they belonged. Never kneeling. Never surrendering. Forever human.